Hello. I know I'm a little bit late, and it's 5:03, and took a little bit more time than I wanted to because I had to get more water. I drink out of this giant water bottle all day, every day. I have like three or four of them to keep me going. And our water filter is empty, so I had to go get more water and fill it up. And I was 3 minutes late, but I'm here now. We're gonna continue reading from Daughter of the Drackan. That's exciting. Um, and I'll wait around for a couple more minutes to see who else wants to jump on this train with me. Um, I know I was didn't show up for any readings last week. I had launch week, I guess the end of launch week for the Witching Vault. Um, so last Tuesday, I was still kind of reeling from that launch, which went swimmingly. I just said that. It went very well. It was a pretty great launch. First time that I've hit number one new release with any of my books, so that was very exciting. I guess if you were around Monday night, Tuesday morning, you may have seen my crazed posts about it. That was super fun, and it's doing really well. And ooh, book two, The Cursed Faith, coming out um, in January on the 20th, and that's so exciting too. I can't even stand it. I am so ready for this new series and all of it that's going to be out in the world. Yeah, it's my little my little freak out excitement there. Still gonna give it a couple more minutes before I start the reading, Daughter of the Drackan, which I might add, I have really enjoyed doing over the last couple of weeks. I think I've mentioned before that I haven't really had a lot of opportunity to read out loud from these books, um, Gyenona children specifically. Um, and I mean, I guess I could have made the opportunity. I could have sat around in my house and read them out loud to myself. My 4-year-old is not quite ready to be read aloud to from those. I have started to try reading The Golden Compass to her from his Dark Materials series, Philip Pullman. I love those. Also, I am totally watching um, the show of that. Season two's out. It's amazing. I think they've done an incredible job of sticking to the books, which I've read countless times and lugged them around everywhere when I was a kid. But yeah, so she, my kid makes it through about 5 minutes. Listening to me read the Golden Compass to her, even with voices. I do character voices for my kid. Not gonna really do those here for my own reading, but I definitely do them for my kid, and she she loves it for about the first 3 minutes, and then she kind of gets bored, and then she says, "Okay, we're done. I want to stop." So uh, that's been fun. But yeah, no, reading Daughter of the Drackan um, out loud has been a really great practice for me um, because I haven't done it much. Like I said, I've had plenty of practice over the last 2 years now, getting up in front of cameras and speaking and recording, and hey, carrying on, even if no one's watching in the moment, or no one's listening in the moment, or people can see me, can't see me, if it's live, if it's not, who knows? But reading out loud is something that has been really helpful for me, and to understand, getting back into my own stories. It's always a little weird to read one's own writing out loud, or maybe I just haven't done it enough, and that's the difference, right? Okay. Well, I am going to start now reading from Daughter of the Drackan. We left off somewhere in the middle of chapter 3 2 weeks ago now, because I missed my own scheduled time last week. So I'll pull this up and I'll go for another 30 minutes and see how far we get with this. You can read along with me, sit back and listen. You can watch my goofy face while I'm reading from my own stuff. But here we go. And she had spent the next 3 days with Daruk, mulling over her encounter with a human that called itself a Lauren and made noises only through its mouth. And then the blackout had taken her and returned her, as ever, to the Great Lake. Now, Keelan slowly woke up and gazed around. The Collin's huge shadow danced upon the wall behind her, and the great Drackan stretched her wings against the glint of the rising sun. She closed her eyes again, vividly remembering those experiences and desperately trying to shoo them from her mind. After that night, it had been impossible for her to control the blasting images of her encounter, and Druk had not let her leave his cave. If any other Drackan had caught her projections, it most likely would have meant her life. The blackout had put an end to those chaotic, propelling thoughts, and she had felt it safe enough to come home. It's nice to see you've come back. A Collin's mind voice filled her head. Keelan's guardian faced the mouth of the cave, wings outstretched, and she gaped a great, roaring yawn. Keelan could only sit up and stretch. The Collin closed her massive jaw and took off in sudden flight, diving down into the valley below. Keelan stared after her, and her heart fluttered, panic knocking against her insides. The Collin hadn't asked any questions, which did not necessarily mean the Drackan didn't know about her adventure. This thought terrified Keelan. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling foolish for thinking such a thing. If the Collin knew how she had spent her last 3 days, her discipline would have been swift and brutal. It would not help Keelan to worry until she actually had reason. She made her way instead toward the Great Lake to ask Daruk for a favor. It took her longer than usual to make it down the cliffs beneath the Collin's cave. Her leg hurt, and she used far more caution than usual. Keelan expected any minute to find some other Drackan swooping down upon her and plowing into her mind, finding out she had willingly been with a human. At every flap of wings, she crouched and hid amongst the rocks and the cliffs, backing into crevices and waiting for the others to pass. No one paid her any attention. Even if she had screamed at them, they still would have flown by. They always did. She was nothing to them. She found Daruk's dirty white form by the edge of the forest. "Where have you been?" "I'm sorry," she replied, running to him. "I was dreaming." She put her face to his neck. He grunted at her contact, and only his tail moved to acknowledge her presence. "What do you need?" "I have a favor to ask of you, and I hope I can count on you." The Drackan sat back and bowed his head, waiting for her request. "I'm going to go back." He sent orange and red flashes to her, and his tail twitched. "I have questions, and I want to get some answers." Daruk remained still. "And to whom will you pose these questions?" She met his gaze and did not need to answer. He growled at her and shoved her away with his head. "You can't be serious. I know you think you can communicate with them, but they'll only trap you in their world. You have to stay away from the humans." She tried to put a hand to his face, but he moved it from her reach and pawed at the ground. "I'll be fine. There's something so familiar about that place, the smell and feel of it. Maybe I've been there before. Maybe my blackouts take me there, and in going back I can find out what's happening to me." Daruk sensed nothing. "I feel like part of me is already there. I need to find out why." "What do you need from me?" "I will not come with you." "I need you to lie for me," Keelan told him. He bowed his head and stretched his wings once, then fell still. "If anyone asks for me, tell them I'm somewhere else. Anywhere else. We need to keep this a secret." He sent faint orange to her. "What makes you think anyone will be looking for you?" It was a good question, and if it had been asked days ago, she wouldn't have had an answer. "I have a feeling someone is watching me, trying hard to keep an eye on me at all times. I don't know who it is, but I can't take that risk." "You take a greater risk with these humans." He had turned away from her completely, and his refusal to face her was both frustrating and endearing. It's not the same. If I was found out, my punishment would be worse than anything humans could ever do to me. You know that. I'll get nowhere if I always hide. Can I count on you for this? Her speech sent more confidence than she felt. What would she do if he wouldn't help her? If she didn't have Daruk, she had no one. His mind brushed softly against hers. If they really want to know, you know I can't stop them. She sent assertion to him, and he growled softly. I'll try, but I don't like it. I know. Thank you. She thought about going to him, but his rigid shoulders suggested she should leave. He had agreed to help, and that was enough. Daruk took flight and disappeared behind the peaks. She left the lake and headed for the east cliffs. She had a plan. If it meant she had to make a place for herself in the human world, then so be it. The importance now lay in finding out where the blackouts came from and how to make sure they stopped. Climbing down the other side of the cliffs, she forced herself to take much more care. Move slowly, don't rush, stay patient. Those things were hard for her, but the definitiveness of her decision held her anxiety at bay. She had a purpose in coming this way again, and every move needed careful calculation. This wasn't playful exploration anymore, and the feeling of being watched still tickled the back of her neck. This was the place that made her hesitate. The field at the edge of the shrubby forest loomed beyond, streaked with orange glow as the sun set behind her. The open field lay entirely exposed, with no shadows and no rock crevices, and nothing to hide her. She had hidden all her life. She doubted that hiding from humans would be any better, but still, she decided to wait for darkness. The stars glittered above her, casting more light than she wanted. She stepped out into the grassy plain, searching the sky. Neither flap of wings nor hiss and growl of angry teeth and crushing minds broke the silent expanse. Only that unfounded fear filled her mind. She'd never seen another Drackan fly anywhere close to the east cliffs, let alone beyond them. But the fear persisted, something always watching. She started to wonder if that fear alone ran itchy fingers down the back of her head, between her shoulders. It took hardly any effort to find the place. Closing her eyes, she felt the nagging familiarity caught the stench in the air, the human stench. She slinked around the edges of the wall toward the same entrance. Before she could enter, a human figure emerged, light pouring out in streams around its shape. Keelan moved into the light and watched the creature. It had long hair and much lighter skin than the Aloran human. Its chest was large in the front, the body more slender and curved. It also wore clothes, but she hadn't seen this type. It was easier for her to make this comparison to the Aloran. For a long time, she had never known what her body was, that she was not simply some wingless and scaleless, mutated Drackan. Years ago, a Colin had returned one night to her cave, and the young Keelan within, unfurling her mouth to release a bloody carcass. Keelan had drawn herself close to the pile and could barely make out the features. She'd never seen such an animal. And Colin had noted her interest and paused only briefly before gorging. There had been similarities between the meal and herself. Soft, fleshy parts instead of claws and talons, the hairless body, the lack of scales. And Colin had only sent the word human. Keelan refused to share in that meal, having immediately understood the crude lesson. She never received another explanation for her difference in physical form. The Drackan in her held its own form of loathing for her body, but she'd learned to bury that a long time ago. Nothing she could do would ever change that. The human in front of her now looked so much like the one she'd watched her guardian consume. It held something on its head, a container, and Keelan caught the sweet scent of water. The human suddenly noticed her standing there, and the container crashed to the ground, shattering with a spray of wet. The thing opened its mouth, and out came jabber much like that which had come from the Aloran. This one's voice rose high in pitch, and the sound of it stopped any recognition of the words. Its voice grew louder, and Keelan thought her ears would burst. Stop, she thought to it, but nothing happened. She pushed harder, Stop it! Her mind prodded firmly, but the human's mind received her words like a stone received water. She could not get through. There was no color. It was either black or white, she couldn't tell, but she realized this creature was too stupid to know she tried to send to it. She could make the noises for growling and grunting, but she didn't know how these humans managed their own sounds. She concentrated on the words, how they sounded in her own mind, thought of watching the Aloran's mouth. Stop. Hearing her own voice surprised her. It was lower than the human's and scratchy, and the fact that she had used it just to speak with this screaming thing made her angry. Now that she had started it, she couldn't go back. The human's blubbering stopped short, its eyes whiter than they should be. Then it screamed, trembling. Keelan repeated the command with her voice, but the stupid creature would not listen. She couldn't stand the noise. She leapt to the human and grabbed its head with both hands. The sound of its neck snapping punctured the screams, and the body fell limp. Pushing it aside, she heard another crack as the head hit stone, and this sound made her stop. She turned around. There it was, a pool of blood glistening in the moonlight and stretching toward her. Seeing this froze something incomplete inside her. Keelan felt her muscles clench. Every part of her turned to burning hot stone. She couldn't take her eyes off the crimson puddle. It held her there as if by physical force, and her heart pounded uncontrollably in her chest. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath of air, and the metallic scent of blood she knew so well enveloped her. This was how she smelled every night after a blackout, and yet it was different. This time, she knew what she had done, had chosen it, and that fresh stink struck something in her, stirring a dark, awful pleasure. She released her breath and felt her heart tighten. She wanted to stay here and do something with the blood, anything. There was no time. She had better things to do. Finally, she ripped her gaze from the sight and felt the moment subside. A voice filled her head. "What are you doing?" It was Daruk. She shook her head and closed her eyes. "What do you need?" "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." He sent a bit of orange. "I've never felt that from you before. What are you doing?" "I'll talk to you about it later, but right now you're making things difficult." She knew she sent agitated red, but didn't care. The annoyance and bitterness in her patterns had surprised her, and as Daruk caught her meaning, his mind withdrew. She shook his words out of her head and put up a mental block. More intrusions would only distract her. Now what? The Aloran, she recalled, had looked at her with a mixture of surprise, pity, and something else when he found her without human clothing. Infiltrating the human dwelling would be nearly impossible if that wasn't corrected. That look had made her so uncomfortable, and she had no desire to see it on other faces. She needed clothes. Doubtlessly, she would still not blend in completely. She couldn't reconcile trying too hard to be like them. But it was the best she could do until she learned more. She quickly stripped the garments from the body and struggled with fitting them on herself. They reeked, and only now did she understand Daruk's disdain for the clothes he'd found her wearing. Her discovery of the human and his frustratingly familiar place had somehow overwhelmed that human stench, but now it was all too apparent. She wrinkled her nose. She took care not to look at the human's blood-soaked hair and head. That yearning trance had been enough on its own, and she didn't want to end up in it all night. An itch existed inside her to do it again, to feel the snap and hear the glorious crack of death upon the ground. But it would not help her, and she consoled herself with the new irritated fire burning in her veins. The new clothes were tight and ill-fitting, with a single hole for both her legs instead of two. That could make things difficult in the future. She'd address it later. She entered the spray of yellow light. The place was quieter than she remembered it, with no movement but the flicker of the lamplight. She stood perfectly still and watched, not wanting to disturb anything. The room was the same, but stranger this time. Another figure came toward her from the back of the hallway, wearing heavier clothing and moving swiftly. It caught sight of her and didn't stop. It looked like the dead one, but seemed more sensible. Keelan was grateful for its silence. This human's features were soft, its movement smooth, and it stopped to eye her garments. "Are you one of the new servers from Ablin?" it asked slowly, and Keelan caught the suspicion there. She did not know what a server was, but she might have been, looking like this. "Yes," she replied. The word from her mouth felt just as strange as it sounded. The human bared its teeth and softened its rigid stance. Keelan almost balked at the contradiction in this display. "Then welcome. What can I do for you?" It spoke way too fast, and before she could come up with an answer, it spoke again. "What do you need?" Keelan paused, letting the words sink in, and then she eyed the heavy thing clasped around the human's shoulders. The Aloran had covered her in one before. It gave her the clothing, and seeing it on another illuminated its useful qualities. She wanted one. "One of these." She reached toward the wrap, and the human leaned away from her touch. Its lack of fear surprised her. "A cloak? That's it?" Doubt looked back at her, and Keelan wondered suddenly if this was too intrusive a request. Some taboo, perhaps? "Yes," she said again, and it sounded even to her like a question. The human kept its eyes on her as it walked toward the door and removed a cloak from a hook in the wall. Keelan had to restrain herself from snatching it viciously away. She wrapped it around her own body, mimicking the way it looked on the human and moving slowly so as to get it right. When it was finally on, the human bared its teeth again. Keelan stepped back at the sudden show of aggression. But its voice did not sound angered. "Anything else?" "I think that's hardly worth coming all the way to the Bridger service house." Keelan paused, wondering what Bridger was. "Yes. One more thing." The human leaned forward. "The Aloran. Where is it?" The words took too long to form in her mind and roll off her tongue, but the human seemed to understand. "Aloran?" the human asked, shifting its stance again from one leg to the other. "You're looking for Aloran?" "Yes." Understanding the speech was becoming a lot easier, but she shouldn't have to answer so many stupid questions. "Aloran went into Bridger a few days ago. Why are you looking for him?" The reference to the Aloran's gender surprised Keelan. Humans didn't have minds, or mind colors for that matter. How in the world did they differentiate the sexes? "He is a friend." The human bared its teeth again and gave a shout. "Friend? Hardly." It drew the cloak tighter about its shoulders again and walked away from her. "How? Where is Bridger?" Keelan asked, cursing at the mistaken words. The human stopped and turned only its head toward her. "Are you serious?" Keelan nodded once. The human made a humming noise. "As you leave this building, there's a road that leads east across the fields to Hillcrest. The bridge will take you across the Hellick River and into Bridger. It's a direct path. You can't miss it." It stared at her and nodded. "Got that?" Keelan adjusted the cloak on her own shoulders, then turned and headed out the door. She found the road easily enough. She heard something slam behind her and congratulated herself. And something brushed against her arm. She whirled around with a barely concealed snarl. The same human had followed her, with part of the cloak pulled up over its head. It stepped back in alarm and cocked its head at her. "Sorry, you seem terribly familiar," it started. "Where are you from?" Keelan would not answer that. "Do I know you?" She had to think hard for this one, and took a handful of seconds to stare at the human. "No one knows me," she replied, and, without thinking, reached for her own fold in the cloak and pulled it up over her head. Turning on her bare heels, she left the human and took the road east. Chapter 5. She reached what she assumed to be Hillcrest as the slivered moon smiled down. There were more humans at this place, much more like the Aloran. They had light skin and dark hair, many with hair growing on their faces. It looked ridiculous. Surrounding them were all sorts of containers and crates, and some of the humans carried long sticks with them. Weapons, perhaps? They watched her warily with narrow, dark eyes as she approached. One asked her in a deep voice where she was headed, and she simply replied, Bridger. The first human nodded, and a second walked her across the river. At the sound of her voice, the second human looked up sharply and might have cowered had not the first strongly commanded it to accompany her. At the end of the river crossing, the human opened a gate and took no time in waiting before closing it and rejoining its companions. She could feel their suspicion on her back. She enjoyed the openness and quiet of her path as dawn broke, but all too soon she ran into a swarm of humans. It took her by surprise as she came upon their numbers, the empty-minded creatures running back and forth amongst each other. No one paid her any heed, did not even see her. They focused instead on the bustle of the place and the piles of oddities in their arms. Curiosity consumed her. What was the point of this? The meaning to all the dull, oddly shaped things they carried? There were so many. She could not keep track of all the new ones passing her by. Some humans traded their goods, bickering, bartering, and rambling on in language too rapid for Keelan to catch. She understood very few of the words, yet here and there she detected anger in one's voice and surprise in another. Most of it was too quick and clipped for her to even pick up on the content. One human stood behind a booth, surrounded by its items and guarding them like a brooding Drackan guards her nest. She peered closer, and the human pounded upon the booth and leaned toward her with a sneer. Show me the coin first, server. It spit the last word with such contempt that Keelan crouched back, glaring into the human's eyes. She reflexively blasted a warning shot at its mind, a stab of challenge. Yet the pain she meant to inflict was met with a wall of nothingness. She growled at it instead and watched the fire in its eyes suffocate. The human stepped back and did not look at her again. She disappeared one more time into the throng, not without hearing the mumble and hiss under the human's breath. The more she tried to study this business, the more the humans glared at her and pulled away. They couldn't possibly know what she was. They did not shoot fear. They did not. They did not shoot fear her way, but a strong contempt that confused her, bundled with the word server, which they flung like a curse. The Drakkans didn't even deign to toss their distaste at her with words. What did they think she was? Obviously, the humans were completely unequipped to understand her search, even if she had actually tried to ask for their help. A window of comprehension opened for her as she watched their behavior. They were arrogant and selfish, bent on guarding their possessions and struggling for power in both offensiveness and volume. Making her way through the sweaty crowd, she caught a familiar scent. It took her a moment, but she recognized it from the Aloran's dwelling. In a multitude of humans like this, it could be impossible to find the source. Humans all looked the same. The sun was high in the sky when she found it. She tried to push herself into its mind, but again was blocked by the nothingness there. It would take a while to get used to that. The Aloran engaged in some sort of exchange, and when it turned away, their eyes locked. It froze and stared at her, blankly mouthing something Keelan could not understand. Replacing whatever it inspected, it mumbled to the other human and walked toward her. Its eyes traveled slowly up and down her body. Katavmir, it breathed, then bared its teeth. Keelan had picked up by now that when a human bared its teeth, it was not in anger or challenge. It was the relaxed and placid face that meant contempt. Or maybe that was confusion. Katavmir. That was the name the Aloran had given her when they met. She remembered what it meant. I am not always silent. The Aloran's eyes widened. It shook its head and bared its teeth again. Indeed. It dawned on her that the Aloran was actually a he, like Daruk. She couldn't tell the difference yet, but mastering that distinction would give the humans less reason to be so suspicious. The Aloran frowned. Where did you come from? The other side of the river. The words still came slowly. From the service house? Yes. She tried to match his stance, tilting her head and slumping her shoulders a bit. But it felt awkward, and when his eyes returned to her from the crowd, she dropped it. All right. His shifting gaze interested her as he glanced among the humans again. We should head back to the turret. We can speak more there, and there's work to be done. He lowered his voice and leaned toward her. You will come with me, won't you? She nodded once, and he bared his teeth one more time. The Aloran led her through the crowd, drawing no attention. He did not try to speak with the others, but in turn they did not scorn him like they had Keelan. Did the other humans not care for the Aloran either? It was possible that his place among the humans rivaled hers among Drakkans. She had quite possibly made the wrong assumption that humans were not sophisticated enough for a functioning hierarchy. They managed to escape onto a smaller dirt road. He didn't talk to her, but she stayed close behind. They passed only a few other humans on the way, and the Aloran was just as cautious as Keelan felt. With some, he would exchange a curt nod and a shared look. There was something different about these ones. Were they also servers? They climbed the last hill, on top of which loomed a huge stone building, casting its shadow against the afternoon sun. A banner flapped from the highest tower, a red creature shimmering in the folds of fluttering blue cloth. Keelan could not place the creature, though it was the tiniest bit familiar. The whole place pulled at her like the East Cliffs, maybe stronger. Was this the source of that call? Was this her answer? The Aloran caught her staring, and she turned to look at him. He nodded at the flag. That's the eagle there. Do you know it? No, she said, and looked up again. The banner's been passed down through generations of the lords of Bridger Turret. It's more a fort than a castle, really, but the turret serves its purpose. He walked toward the front gates of the building. Keelan followed silently behind. They took a path to elude the front gates and stopped under a small archway at the side of the building. It was blocked by a low, curved wooden door. Keelan noticed the Aloran's habit of using small, secretive entrances. Did that mean something? He dug into a bag at his side, slowly pulling out a heavy gray stick. He stuck it into a hole in the door, turning it with precise twists of his wrist, and continued the story. Ages ago, the eagle represented all the Bridger lords. There were stories of how the lords flew over the lands, watching everything underneath them. I doubt they actually flew, but it was the idea that created the feeling of safety. Bridger is not the king city, but it always seemed to know more than the other towns. People say there was an all-seeing eye in the turret, that evil could never subvert its gaze. He stopped as something clicked, and the door swung open, and he absently put the item back in his bag. That had to be a myth. Evil finds its own way in. Keelan didn't understand the word evil, but the Aloran's lips drew thin when he said it, and she thought she understood the meaning. But it is not our place to change the fate of simple folk like us, is it, Alvmir? Anyone can change, she told him carefully. He turned to her with narrow, sly eyes and bared his teeth. Exactly. They stepped through the doorway, following hallways down a roughly cobbled flight of stone steps dripping with muddy water. I apologize for the state of things. These are the servers' halls, and nobody bothers to clean them anymore. Does it bother you? No. Being confined all around by walls formed a cloying uneasiness inside her, but she did not think that was what he meant. Where do you come from? He asked. Answering that question would be an issue. It was tempting to talk now that she knew she could, but the last thing she wanted was to mix her Drackan life with the human world. Then she realized that the pit in her stomach, along with feeling pressed upon by these walls, was shame. Where did she come from? That was a secret she had to keep, so she said nothing. The Aloran nodded. Maybe I should not have asked. I was prying too quickly, and I'm sorry. Keelan made a new promise to never speak of her home. She was here for clues, the reason for her stolen time. But that was it. She could talk about herself, though the thought was unappealing, but she would never speak of Drakkans. The human world might have some answers for her, but they did not deserve the slightest knowledge of her kind. That would destroy all chances of secrecy here, and she would not put the Drakkans in danger of discovery. There was, however, a need to come up with a story. The humans liked to ask questions, that much was clear, and she might not be able to get away with silence forever. They came through many open rooms lined with more humans. Some slept in the corners and others sat with armfuls of clothing, mending and cleaning. The Aloran nodded at many of them, and they returned the gesture with a mumble of his name, baring their teeth. It was dark down here, but they seemed used to it. Keelan certainly knew her way around the dark, but this was the stale, rank, artificial light of the indoors. She wished silently for fresh air in this cloying maze. They entered a much larger room filled with buckets and tools, some steaming and bubbling. Water splashed far away. An approaching human nearly knocked her over as it scrambled by with an armload of vegetation. More humans followed hurriedly, and she looked at the Aloran. His teeth were bared more than ever, and he took a deep breath, taking in the view. "The kitchen," he said simply, and dropped his shoulders back. "This is my domain." Another sly glance. "In the turret, at least, when I'm a server." He was hinting at something, and Keeling couldn't decide if it annoyed or amused her. "And there is supper to be made," he said with a raised voice. He clapped his hands together and left her, walking toward the others and waving his hands. "The veal. Is the veal ready yet? Watch that stew before it boils over." The humans had divvied up the duties, jumping at the Aloran's call and following his every instruction. Compared to the throng of humans outside bridge or turret, this was much more preferable. There was a lot less contempt and scorn. It was just as busy, but a purpose connected the humans here. Minutes passed, and when things started to settle down, the Aloran gestured for Keelan to join him. He stood behind a long wooden table with a sharp object in one hand. In the other, he held green and red plants, fresh and wet. He put a small piece of green into his mouth, chewed, and cut the others. Then he offered some to her, but she declined. She didn't eat plants. He cut with one hand, tasted with the other, and stared at her. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said. She never thought she would have come back either. "Why?" she asked. "Did you want to?" "Well, yes. You're different, Avmir. I never wanted to let you go that night, but I am no one's master." He smiled and returned to cutting the food. "When I saw you last night, I knew you'd come back." Keelan looked up into his darkened face. Had she heard him correctly? She wasn't here last night. She was at the high hills, at the lake with Daruk, at Colin's cave. What was he saying? "I saw the way you moved, and I recognized you at once." He stopped his work and lowered his voice. "I had no idea you were in that business." Keelan could not think of any answer that didn't sound ridiculous in her own mind. He thought she knew what he was talking about. The night before had been just like any other. She had scaled the cliffs, hunted with Daruk, woken at the Great Lake from a blackout. "The man was an outsider," the Aloran continued, cutting quickly now. "No one ever had a chance to find out who he was. He came from the west, and that's all we know. You must have had something on him to keep him from getting into the city. His dogs could have been used for hunting, but you did what you had to do." She had to remind herself to breathe. This was fast, almost too fast. She did not expect to find a connection like this so soon. "Dogs?" she asked, not knowing the word, and she had to distract herself from the excitement. "Yes." He put two fingers in his mouth and whistled loudly. There was a scuffle of feet and a bark, and a four-legged creature bounded through the hallway and skidded to a halt beside him with a wagging tail. It was a muscular creature, with sturdy flanks and thin, tall legs. Brown and covered with dark gray spots, the dog stood there with drooping eyes, a wet tongue lolling from the side of its mouth. Theolorin reached down to scratch the creature between its ears. This is Port, my dog. She's a big one, but she's got nothing on those other hounds. I'm amazed you handled them so well. Keelan heard his words, but they didn't register. A female voice entered her mind, and she stared at the dog. The creature remained passive and contained on the outside, yet its mind voice flashed the darkest red. You may look like you are a man, but I know you are something else entirely. Stay away from my human. Keelan's nostrils flared, but she forced herself not to react. She took a deep breath and sent back. I had no intention of harming him. The dog licked its chops and gave a low growl. Then the growl turned into a gentle whine, and it turned on its heels to lie down at the other side of the kitchen. Theolorin watched Keelan silently. Yes, she said, watching the creature's departure. Dog. Her heart raced again. She knew the smell of dog, too. She had tried to scrub it away in the lake after her blackout. The dog blood, the human blood, the Aloran having seen her, she was in the right place. If the Aloran had put together these facts, he could help her with more. Strange, he said, staring after his dog. Port, she never growls. Losing her eyesight, the old thing. The dog knew what she was. It was a relief to know that another creature could tell she was not fully human. Even one day among the humans had started to make her feel more like them than she preferred. Why were you watching me last night? She asked cautiously, watching his reaction. He looked up at her and smiled wide. I did not mean to. I know the importance of secrecy, but I was on an errand of my own, and I caught sight of you. You are hard to mistake, Othmer, even in server's clothing. He looked over once more. How did you come by these? The service house, she said, and bared her teeth back at him. She hoped it was believable. Theolorin laughed. Now there's a smile. And I'm gonna stop it right there. Oh, that's super fun, reading through all of that and listening to well, myself first of all, but going through all the crazy new discoveries of Keelan in the human world. That's fun. I haven't been through this in a really long time. I love it. Oh, and now I see that I have some people here watching and saying hi. Connie said hi. Connie, shout out to you. Thanks for coming to watch me. And Dan said, oh, thank you, Dan. Dan said, love your work. You inspire. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you. And thank you for stopping by and listening, hanging out, joining me, sticking around. And that's why I do this. So if I can keep inspiring people with just doing my own goofy thing, I'll keep it up. I'll keep going. No problem. And Brian made it. Excellent. That was well on my end. It says it was 9 minutes ago. I don't know, Brian. Did you make it on time this time or just slightly late? I was slightly late as well myself. It's fine. No big deal. Jason. Hi, Jason. Thank you for being here and saying hello and coming to listen to me read and hang out with me. Also, Jason, yes, I need to reply to your messages. That's always something I have to say. So here's the thing. I am the worst person at communication via anything, which sounds ridiculous because most of the ways that I communicate with really pretty much anyone is like through written stuff, right? Emails, texts, messages on Facebook or social media or any other kind of, I don't know, connecting network, what have you. I'm so bad. I'm so bad. I feel like I've mentioned this before. I don't know. My parents have even taken to calling and texting my husband instead of me because I don't even get back to them. So they just don't even bother anymore. I'm really bad at it. So I try so hard to stay on top of messages and emails. I love getting emails from readers, from friends. Jason is a writing buddy. We've been friends and sharing works in progress with each other for, oh my gosh, it's been like 5 years. But I mean, yeah, we were uh, writing together with collaborative writing challenge 5 years ago before I published Daughter of the Drackan. Ha! This is my very first book, the very first one ever, and and yeah, so it's good to have other author friends. Um, if any of you out there are writers, authors trying to do this whole thing too, find some writer friends you can share your work with. They can share their work with you. You guys give and take feedback. Um, Jason, Jason's been an alpha reader for me for like almost all of my things. Alpha reader being someone who, um, oh, he says, yeah, almost 6 years now. I can't, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that. That's crazy. Um, Alpha reader being someone who reads your work as you're in the process of writing it. So, and I can definitely say that Jason was one of the most influential people to help kick my butt into gear when I was writing Sleepwater Beat. Granted, I was pregnant, so like I needed a lot of um, motivation. But I would write a couple chapters, and I think I sent him sections like every week with more chapters, and it was Jason's excitement and the feedback from two other alpha readers I had at the same time. But mostly Jason. Jason put in the most work helping me out. It's that kind of excitement, getting that feedback returned that um, it kept me going. Like, lit a fire under me, and I kept writing because he was excited about something I had no idea whether anyone else would enjoy. So as I was writing it, I didn't burn out, which doesn't really seem to happen much anymore. I just keep going and going and going. Of course, I say that, and then some days I have to step away from the computer and not touch my work or my office at all, because I have in the past tended to overwork myself. Um, and Brian said I seem to do pretty well communicating and interacting online as far as he's seen. Yeah, well, those are those are tiny pieces of interaction that I can just pop in like and then pop back off again and leave it at that. I have this thing where if someone contacts me with an email or a message on Facebook or something that like I feel invested in wanting to reply to in a way that is how do I say it, like more in depth, right? I end up like not doing it because I know it's gonna take me half an hour to write this reply because that's what I do. I write things. I write long things. I write the emails and messages that could be published as their very own books. So maybe the problem is that I just write too long in my communication, and I should shorten that, become very abrupt and blunt, and then I would respond more to more things. I don't know what I don't know what's worse, not getting a reply at all or getting a reply that's just like short and clipped and feels like a robot sent it. Which, hey, if I had a robot who could reply to my messages, I would probably use it. Um, because I feel awful when I let things go for so long. Some messages, been in my inbox for months and months, as well as some emails. So I really always very much appreciate the people who reach out to me and say, hey, I know that you're busy and I know you're doing things. Just want to say hi. Jason does that a lot. Thank you, Jason. And for people who don't take it personally when I don't respond, um, because it is not personal in any way whatsoever. Never is it personal. I have so many things going on. It's not really an excuse, um, but I think my brain only has bandwidth for you know writing all day long. And the occasional commenting and interaction on social media, and of course, reading from Dawn of the Drackan for 35 minutes with you guys. That's just reading, so that's very fun. And yeah, so if anyone ever messages me and doesn't get a response right away, now you know. Now you know it's because I'm just the worst at it, and I can't even stay on top of it with my own family. So everyone's pretty much just learned that Catherine is the reclusive writer person who just hides away in her office all day and can't manage to reply to things. Um, but it is nice though when like people call me and I answer the phone and they get so happy because they never expected me to answer. So that's little insight into my foibles here. What a great word, foibles. It doesn't get said enough. Oh boy. So now that was a good reading. That was fun. I enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me here. Thank you for hanging out with me, commenting, saying hello. I am gearing up for not the rest of the week, working the rest of the week. I do give myself time off around the holidays, but it's in the form of like half days because I've also learned through, over the last 2 years of just like writing full time. That's what I do. I've learned that if I take more than 2 days away from writing in a row, I get really super itchy and um, grumpy and irritable. And so it's really the best thing for everyone if I step into my office for a couple hours at least every day. So I try to stick with that. My husband has learned that's the best way to deal with it. He will, sometimes if in the past where I've taken breaks that have been longer than 2 days, and he'll remind me, you're kind of acting weird. Have you written today? Do you need to go write? Do you need to go into your office and write? And then like, yeah, okay, thank you. So it's my job, and then also it's the thing that keeps me like a normal, sane person. Who would have thought, right? I'm super fortunate that way. If 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 you have the chance to find a job that doesn't feel like work and that makes you itchy if you stay away from it for too long, do that job 100%. Because I feel like I'm playing all day every day. Don't get me wrong, like it's hard work, it's long hours. I'm behind my desk for like 12 hours a day, but I love it. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else after having been doing this for the last 3 years. It's incredible. And I know I'm very super fortunate to be able to do that. And then I found a way to be able to do that. You know, it took a while to get to the point where it didn't feel like slaving away just to be able to write as much as I do in a day. Also, for any of the writers out there, if you think, writing big numbers, 10, 12, 15,000 words a day, is impossible, it's not. I remember the first time that I ever hit 10,000 words in a day, and I actually thought that anyone who said they could write that much in one day and have the words like actually be quality, like have it be a quality story, not just writing like blah 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 10,000 times. I thought they were full of crap, and I feel like I could not fathom how writing that many words in a day was possible. And then I did it the first time. That's I write on average about 13,000 words a day, so I've gotten up to that point, exercised the muscle. But when I finally did reach 10,000 words in one day, I think it took me like 12 hours. Um, but I just had to laugh. I kind of just exploded about it because when you realize that what you thought was impossible is actually possible and can be replicated and done again and again, it kind of breaks down like all the structures of what you thought about the world. So, um, anyone who doubts it, I recommend giving it a try. If you can, set aside a whole day, see what happens. Yeah, you never know. Um, but that was one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that I can actually do a lot of the things that I thought were impossible. Um, Everyone can. Like, all it takes is just to be like, okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to break down that wall of reality and do something that seems like a complete and total impossibility. Do it. I challenge you. The challenge. Do do one thing that you think is impossible, or at least try. I would love to hear about that. If anyone comes up with something in the next week, where you go out and say, this is something I'd really love to do, but oh my gosh, it's impossible. And I'm not saying, like, go empty your bank account for a jet ski or something. I mean, that you could if you want. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you know, something about, your own skills or your own passions, abilities, things that you love to do that may be too scary to try doing, or that may seem like, anyone who says they can do that is full of crap. Like I thought about myself before I got to that point. Do it. Come back and tell me about it. I want to hear. That's the best part. Is talking about it and like seeing what other people can do, because I can do what I do very well. There are so many things I can't do, like reply to people. And I love talking about that space, um that space of like stepping across the line out of your comfort zone, right? Like, if it feels weird, it like makes you a little nervous. You're like, oh gosh, I can't do that. That's a bad idea. But you still come back to it over and over and over again. That's when I know for myself that it's something I need to do. It's when I feel that, like, oh, I don't know. But I keep thinking about it all day, wanting to do it. And that's what tells me. I've learned to recognize those signs that I'm actually being shown that I need to try this. I have to step outside of my comfort zone. And hey, you know what? Failing is how we learn, right? I'll be the first person to admit I have failed at plenty of things, plenty of times. But then you stumble upon, that one thing, maybe two things, who knows, that like really break through that ceiling for you. And then you come tell me about it, right? Come meet me here on probably not Thursday. Thursday is Christmas Eve, and while we're not too Christmassy celebratory in the Hudson house over here, I still have a respect for the holiday intention. Being around family, taking a break, sitting back, enjoying the time in reality, and not sitting behind my computer and typing away, losing myself to stories. So, um, I don't know if anyone wants me to be on here on Thursday, on Christmas Eve. Um, Let me know. Then I might. I don't know. Otherwise, I'll be back Tuesday of next week, which is the 29th. Um, and then we'll keep reading Daughter of the Drackan. And you guys can tell me about the things that you found that make you feel weird, like you're going out of your comfort zone. If you can do those things the next week, even better. But I would love to hear like what those things are from you guys. Like, what are those things that you keep coming back to over and over and over, that you're passionate about, but that you think are impossible? Because like 98% of the time, they're not actually impossible, which I'm still learning. I'm still learning what's possible. If myself from 3 years ago were like in a conversation with me now, which would be really cool to do, um, I I probably would have like tried to push me now off a cliff or something. Like, you're a liar. It works. It's possible. It happens. Um, so I hope you guys have a good night. Thanks for joining me and listening to me, just ramble, stream of consciousness about literally everything. Um, yeah. So I will be back on Tuesday unless people say, "Hey, be here on Christmas Eve," and then maybe I'll be here. I don't know. Probably have to run that by the husband first. um, but if not, I'll still see you guys on Tuesday, and we will meet again. Thank you for joining me here. Have a great night and enjoy the rest of your week. Holidays if you celebrate them. Weekend, long weekend if you don't celebrate. Whatever. I'm gonna go now. Have a good night.